Welcome everybody to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. Today's guest is someone I'm really excited to have on the program. I met him almost a year ago, last May, at the ARE. That's the Association for Research and Enlightenment. You can find out more about them at Edgar Cayce A.R.E. My guest is known as a psychic explorer, also known as the psychic lawyer. His name is Mark Anthony, and he's known worldwide. He's a fourth-generation psychic medium who communicates with spirits. He's an Oxford-educated attorney who has tried over 100 jury trials and is licensed in Florida and Washington, D.C., and also to work before the U.S. Supreme Court. And I've thought about this as I prepared for this interview, and I have to say that it would be great to have an attorney who could read the minds of the jury, especially during jury selection. So I'm going to ask Mark about that later, but I want to give you some more of his background because it's quite impressive. Mark was named a notable graduate by the Arthur Findlay College of Psychic Science. He is a Spiritual Awakenings International Circle of Honor honoree, and he received the OMMIE, O-M-M-I-E, Award for Best Psychic Medium in the OMMIE Awards sponsored by the OM Times and iSpirit Media. Anthony is known as the Psychic Explorer due to his extensive background in science, quantum physics, survival of consciousness, near-death experiences, history, archaeology, philosophy, and theology. He travels to mystical locations and remote corners of the world to examine ancient mysteries and supernatural phenomena. Mark appears nationwide on TV and radio, including the CBS hit show The Doctors, Gaia TV's Beyond Belief with George Noory, and Destinations of the Damned on the Discovery Channel. He co-hosts The Psychic and the Doc on the Transformation Network. He is a VIP executive coordinator for Best Holistic Life magazine. Mark's latest multiple award-winning bestseller, The Afterlife Frequency, was designated by prettyprogressive.com as one of the top books about faith in God. And like his other bestseller, Evidence of Eternity, was considered for a Pulitzer Prize. His best-selling book, Never Letting Go, is recommended by grief counselors and hospices worldwide. Mark Anthony is a headline speaker at expos and spiritual organizations such as Edgar Cayce A.R.E., the International Association for Near-Death Studies, the Shift Network, the Galileo Commission, Center for Consciousness Studies, Spiritual Awakenings International. He's helping parents heal Vail Symposium and universities, including Brown, Columbia, Harvard, and Yale. So that's quite a mouthful, and I'm going to stop here. And Mark, we typically ask our guests to begin with their spiritual journey from childhood until now. I know that could take a few hours, so maybe you could keep that kind of short.
That might take a while, Bob.
Yeah.
But you did say something earlier. It'd be nice to have a lawyer who could read the minds of the jurors. And I know you were making a joke, but I don't read people's minds. Okay, I'm a medium, not a mind reader, so I can communicate with spirits. And being a psychic medium certainly gives me insights into people and situations in jury trials. My spiritual journey pretty much began the day I was born. I came into this world as what's known as a blue baby. I wasn't breathing, and they were about to pronounce me dead. And my mother, in the delivery room, she said, she yelled at the doctor, "You work on him." And to humor her, they held me up and they were smacking my fanny and rubbing my back, and all of a sudden I started coughing. And so I almost didn't make it, but for various reasons I did. And by the time I was 5 years old, I almost died on 3 different occasions. I had a near-death experience when I was 4. And a couple months before that, I started seeing spirits. Now, it's not unusual for toddlers to kind of interact with their invisible friends, but mommy and daddy could see who I was talking about because both my parents had these abilities. So the ability for me to communicate with spirits runs on both sides of the family. Well, and I've tracked it back into the 1890s on both sides, and I assume it goes further back than that. So that, in a nutshell, is how things started. I was going to become a priest. I was raised in the Catholic faith, but I felt that the priesthood and the Catholicism, with all due respect to the church, was too limiting and constricting. So and too filled with rules. So I ended up going to law school. So I kind of jumped out of the rule-laden frying pan into the regulatory fire. And throughout my life, I've made it a point to study belief systems, try to understand the afterlife. And then some years back, I left the practice of law to focus entirely on my spiritual work. But I am called in occasionally to investigate cold cases. Recently, I was on Discovery Channel's Destinations of the Damned because they brought me in to investigate an abandoned sanatorium in Indiana where there'd been what is believed to have been a murder-suicide. Although the information I got, it appears that it was a double murder and covered up by the perpetrators. There was more than one to make it look like a murder-suicide to cover their tracks. So I've had a very interesting life, I believe, and that in a crystallized nutshell, it would be my spiritual journey.
Yeah. Well, that whole birth experience seems to indicate that you weren't sure you wanted to come into this incarnation from the beginning.
Yeah,
and then
some days I'm still not so sure. But yeah, well, the way I look at it is, had I been born maybe 10 or 20 years earlier, I would not have made it. And when I was already seeing spirits at 3.5, and at age 4, I was very sick, and I went into cardiopulmonary failure, and that's when I had a near-death experience. And I explain that in great detail in my book, The Afterlife Frequency. And it was really fascinating, Bob, growing up with parents who had these abilities. And Dad was a U.S. Navy SEAL. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, and after the Navy, he became an aerospace engineer. My mother was a commercial illustrator. I'm the first person in the family to have gone public with their abilities. And growing up with parents who could see spirits, and our discussions at the dinner table, we talk about Jesus, Buddha, St. Francis, Gandhi, Krishna. I mean, we always, even though I was raised in the Catholic faith and my dad's family were Baptists from Pennsylvania, they were very conservative Northern Baptists, we always took an interfaith approach and always respected the beliefs of other people. And I feel very fortunate to have been raised by the parents that I was raised by.
Yeah. It seems like you could have felt conflicted with these abilities in the Catholic Church. I mean, I can understand, deciding not to go into the priesthood, but up until what age did you maintain your Catholicism, I guess is what I mean. Yeah.
To maintain
your Catholicism. And going to church and observing those.
I don't know if I
rituals.
ever officially left the church. I've had a number of friends who were priests, And I take an interfaith approach to things because the Catholic Church is really fascinating from a spiritual standpoint. And a lot of the high-profile mediums like myself and some of my colleagues are Catholic. And I think that the religion lends itself to being more open-minded than people who are strictly chapter, line, and verse. And once again, I'm not insulting or crashing on anyone's belief systems, but in the Catholic religion, we have saints, we have angels, there's a veneration of Mother Mary, then there's, belief in negative entities like demons and such. So within the realm of the Catholic faith, there's all types of metaphysical beings. And I think that makes people a bit more open-minded or accepting when you do have these abilities. Now, throughout the course of my life, I got to the point where I no longer believe in the devil. I don't believe in demons. I don't believe in eternal damnation. And it's interesting when I get criticized by evangelical Christians and Muslims, because it seems like that hardcore Christians and Muslims are in love with hell. They like hell because everyone's going there except them. And I do believe that a devil exists, but I call the devil the ego, the human ego, edging God out, ego. And think about it, Bob. Whenever you, and I'm not specifically saying you, but for all the listeners, whenever you've done anything that's really unkind or hurtful to another person, were you acting out of love and concern for them, or were you acting out of a me as center of the universe perspective? We don't need a guy with a pitchfork sticking us in the butt to motivate us to do negative things. Human history is filled with ego-driven personalities who, because of their self-centeredness, are inflicting horrific trauma and pain and devastation upon our fellow humans. I try to avoid politics, but I don't mind crashing on Vladimir Putin because of his ego, his desire to rebuild the Russian Empire. He invaded a country that posed no threat to him, bombing schools, ordering the bombing of schools and hospitals and infrastructure targets. Now, is that out of love for humanity and the Ukrainian people or the Russian people that he's doing this for? Or is it out of me, I want to be Vladimir the Great? So when you start looking at things in terms of ego versus the spiritual, people who embrace the spiritual path, whether it is through religion or through their own connection with the divine, it's about peace, it's about love, healing, empathy, compassion, and love. It's a love-based practice. People who embrace the ego and self-centeredness, well, that's when they are creating a block between themselves and their own spirituality.
Right. Yeah, a friend of mine, actually an ex-Catholic priest, Vince Lisi, talks about the fact and uses this as a mantra that I am the love of God in physical form.
Yes.
And to be able to own that and be able to see other people also as being the love of God in physical form. We could really solve the world's problems pretty quickly with that kind of a mindset.
We really could, and that's a very, very good point, Bob, is when people start embracing the love, embracing God. I mean, what did Jesus tell us? Jesus told us to love one another. Jesus said, be better than me. Now, talk about setting the bar high.
Yeah,
okay,
right.
Be better than Jesus. And what was fascinating about the teachings of Jesus, he never came and said, I am a Christian. He was called rabbi. Now, you can't get more Jewish than rabbi. And rabbi in Hebrew means teacher. And he was a teacher. And the Jewish religion was teaching and promulgating that we are the chosen people. And And perhaps at one point that was correct, because they were monotheistic in a world surrounded by polytheistic religions. But what Jesus was teaching people is that the Word of God, the peace, the love, the understanding, the compassion, is not just for one group of people, but for all people. I loved when Gandhi said at one time, he said, "What religion is God?" And then he asked a group of quarreling Muslims and Hindus, he said, "We're all the children of God, so why do you raise your hands against your brothers and sisters simply because they call God by a different name?" And I believe if we stop the my way is right, your way is wrong, and accept that there are many paths to the top of the mountain, and as the Hindus teach, the only person on the wrong path is one running around the mountain telling everyone else they're on the wrong path.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I want to back up just to let the audience know how we met. I was looking to go down to the A.R.E. to a conference last May on ancient civilizations, and my one goal was to meet Mark Antony.
Really?
Because I saw that you were on the list of guest speakers, and I thought, okay, this is somebody I want to meet and maybe convince him to be on my podcast. So I was sitting at lunch with my contingent of friends from Pittsburgh, and there were 2 empty seats at our table. And who walks over and sits down but Mark Antony and Rocky? Rocky, by the way, is Mark's right-hand person. And I just looked up sort of agape. I guess my mouth probably fell open, and I said, "Well, I'm here to meet you." That's why I came down here.
Well, first off, thank you. And secondly, that is what I refer to as spiritual synchronicity. And spirits have a way of maneuvering. They're not here to control us or dominate us, but they can set into motion a chain of events. You wanted to meet me, and I remember Rocky and we just gotten lunch, and we were looking for a nice place to eat, and we saw you with a couple other people, and I remember we said, well, these look like nice people, let's sit with them, and everything just came together. So that was one of those situations in life where everything fell into place at the right time, and it's quite an honor to be here. Thank you, Bob, for having me.
Well, it was meant to be. We'll just say that. Now, the book that I'm most familiar with is Evidence of Eternity, and that's the book that's here. And one of the things that struck me there is your ability to see auras, and how that sometimes is a great thing to see, and sometimes can be upsetting, because it gives you a sense of a person, or perhaps a premonition about what may be happening to that person or with that person. Could you talk about that a minute, and how you, not only how you experienced that and how you've dealt with it, but how you deal with it now, if you still see auras, and do you see that as a positive, or do you wish you didn't see those things?
We could do an entire show just on auras.
Okay.
But to begin, a lot of people wonder about an aura. Behind me, there's some lamps. I got the Tesla sphere in the corner, which got the cool electromagnetic energy. I got a red crystal there, and then I have a lamp. All right. What do all those things have in common? They're glowing. That glow can also be called an aura. What an aura is, Bob, is it's the glow of an energy field In other words, it's the glow around an energy source. We know from science, we can prove that the human body has an electrical field. And so there's a glow around a light bulb because it's emitting energy. Well, human beings emit energy as well. And everybody can see auras. It just takes a little bit of practice. You look at someone and you just relax your eyes and you'll kind of see an outline around them. Well, people have been seeing auras for centuries. Look at art, not just Christian art, but ancient Egyptian art, Buddhist art, Hindu art. I was in Thailand, and when you see images of Buddhist angels and saints and Hindu saints and figures, they all have this halo around them. Look at images in Christian art, particularly in the medieval era, and the Renaissance, where you see a halo around Jesus, around Mary, around the saints. Well, seeing auras is nothing new. People have been seeing auras for centuries, and a halo is an aura. So when you're encountering a deeply spiritual person like a St. Francis of Assisi or a St. Teresa of Avila, you see this amazing energy field around them. A lot of our expressions, green with envy, a yellow-bellied coward, red with passion, with anger, those come from auras. Why? Because the aura changes. It'll get either tighter or a little bit more diffuse, depending on what's going on with the person. People who tend to become envious, their aura will start to shimmer with a green color. That's where green with envy comes from. When people are afraid, the aura tends to spike a yellow color. Rage and passion tends to be red. So, where do you think all these came from? Over the centuries, these observations started getting incorporated into our language. Now, my father, he had the ability to see when people were going to die based on their aura. And thankfully, I did not inherit that particular ability. What he would see is this black line around them and like a black veil over their face. And he was a Navy SEAL, and he was going into battle. When he was going into battle, he said that he'd see these on certain of his friends and troops that he was working with, and anytime he saw that on them, they all died. He said in one instance, they were getting ready to go into battle, and he saw it on 90% of the Marines that were working with them. And that day, the Marines took a 90% casualty rate in that battle. And when I would be out with Dad and we'd go to a store, we'd be doing something, and he'd see somebody and I'd see him turn away like that. I go, "What's going on, Dad?" He goes, "I'm seeing it." And he didn't like this. It was very upsetting to him. And but when I was practicing law, when I would be selecting a jury or when I'd be in negotiations, I would scan people's auras. Now, usually the parties, like the plaintiff or the defendant, their auras are real diffuse because they're nervous. The attorney's auras tend to be really tight, because they're real focused. Yeah. And I also got a sense of when we're going to be able to cut a deal or if we could not cut a deal based on scanning people's auras. Now, it's not foolproof, but it's pretty darn good. And people say, well, isn't that an unfair advantage? We all have a skill set. We all have a number of skill sets in our life. That happens to be one of mine. There are other people that have different skill sets. We play the hand of cards that we're dealt with. And that is one of my skill sets. What was really cool, my mom and I, we'd go out to lunch and we'd sit there and just kind of check out people's auras. She would teach me like what to look for and all that. And we did never try to be invasive or cross boundaries. We would just look at the energy glow and discern whatever feelings we were getting, because I believe in spirituality, as in law, there needs to be a code of ethics. Yeah. You just don't go up and fling a reading at somebody. You just don't go up and start scanning their aura, trying to find things out about them. You can notice these things, but you should never intrude upon somebody's privacy.
Yeah. Okay, shifting gears a bit. and I'll soon get off this book and we'll get into your other books, but uh, late in this book, you talk about work with pets, and I guess I've had a few people on the show who communicate with pets, or I had someone on the show, Cheryl Beller, who uses aromatherapy with pets quite effectively. So I was, and I have to say, just audience, these books will bring you to tears. I don't know. I don't know if I'm more sensitive than the average reader, but the stories that you tell are so heart-wrenching or joyful that my tears either come from joy or just sadness in identifying with the people. But the particular story, and you've written this book quite a while ago, so I don't know if you'll remember this one, but it happened to be a police officer whose canine had not just died, he had to have the canine put to sleep.
Yeah.
So there was that sense of this very important dog who he had spent many hours with, who had actually, the dog had saved his life.
Yeah.
And,
Ajax, I remember the dog's name was Ajax.
Right. Okay.
And it was fascinating because animals do communicate. When I was in Catholic school, it was only humans have souls, animals don't. Well, au contraire, animals have souls. Yeah. And if you look at the patron saint of ecology, the environment, and animals was St. Francis of Assisi. And what I love about St. Francis is he's an interfaith character. He's respected by Protestants, Muslims venerate him, and he was an animal communicator. There was a wolf that was terrorizing a village in Italy, and he went into the woods, and the wolf approached him, and he calmed the wolf down, he petted it, he fed it, and the wolf stopped attacking people. Now, that's pretty amazing. And he had some uncanny ability to connect with animals. And when animals die, their soul, which I call the electromagnetic soul, that's a concept that I introduce in my book, The Afterlife Frequency, their souls are capable of communication. And when I hear people say, oh, they're dumb animals, no, they're not dumb animals. They're not dumb at all. It's a different form of intelligence. And once a spirit is released from a body, they are an immortal living being capable of intelligent communication. What I find fascinating about spirit communication is when animals come in, they're very direct. They either liked it or they didn't. Human relationships, we all have these nuances and strings and things. Animals either like you or they don't. I've communicated with dogs, cats, horses, bunnies, gerbils, hamsters, a bear one time. That was really interesting. I was doing a reading for this family, and they were real country people, and I mean that in a very complimentary way. They came from the interior part of Florida. People there, they have a real pronounced accent. And so I'm doing the reading. It was the son, the mother, and two daughters, and all of a sudden, their father came through, and they were real happy, and I was describing him, and then I said, whoa, there's a black bear that just came in and is right next to your dad. And I'll never forget, Bob, the son goes, well, Daddy done shot himself a big old black bear once. And I'm like, okay. And the bear communicated with me, and the message from the bear, I deciphered as sometimes you're the predator and sometimes you're the prey. And it looked like Daddy and the bear were doing just fine in spirit. And I always found that very, very fascinating. I also believe, and I've had this discussion with fellow mediums, that any being capable of the emotion of love is capable of spirit communication. So to date, I've not communicated with any reptiles or insects, and quite frankly, I'm okay not talking to an alligator. But the thing is, animals that are capable of the emotion of love, because they're a more advanced soul, more advanced being, and spirit communication involves some pretty intense complexities. Now, by saying that, I'm not denigrating the insect or the reptile kingdoms, because they certainly have their place. Everything has their place, and their contributions to our entire biosphere, our entire ecosystem. So, but when it comes to spirit communication, basically warm-blooded creatures can communicate.
Yeah. I do have a friend who communicated with a turtle uh, because when she walked into a friend's house, she heard a voice and couldn't imagine where it was coming from, and she looked down, it was coming from the aquarium. And the turtle just said, "I'm hungry. feed me." And she said, "Well, I'll talk to your owners and see if this is okay to do." And it ends up that the owners had the turtle on a diet based on the veterinarian's recommendation, that
Wow.
they had been feeding it too much and it wasn't good for its health. But that's the first time I've heard of reptile communication.
Well, and that's interesting, because it wasn't necessarily a message of love. The animal communicator is very sensitive to animals and was picking up a very primordial instinct, which is, I'm hungry.
Right.
And reptiles. Some reptiles, like I know the bearded dragons, and they get a bad rap just because of their name, but they're really fascinating reptiles. They recognize people, they'll let you pet them, and they do respond to some form of affection. So I'm gonna be open-minded about that, but without a doubt, she picked up on this animal was hungry and was emitting that.
Yeah. Now I've also been told by someone that they have discovered that there is a group of spirit guides, animal spirit guides, who not only look out for other animals, but they try to help humans in their ability, I guess, to help humanity evolve. And that was a new concept to me, because I'm able to communicate with my spirit guides pretty well. But to think that there's a group of animals up there too, in a supportive role, maybe with my cat.
Yeah. Yeah, the Native American spirituality is very fascinating, and a key component of Native American spirituality is the totem, and a totem is an animal guide. And when I've worked with Native American spiritualists, they talked about that quite a bit. When I was in Hawaii and I was working with the priests of the ancient religion, they also talk about animals. What's really cool in Hawaii, unlike in other cultures, they venerate the shark, and they believe that the shark is an akua, which is the soul of the reincarnated soul of humans. And traditionally, the Hawaiians did not hunt or eat shark because they didn't want to be eating one of their reincarnated relatives. Now, I grew up in East Coast Central Florida, and and it was in the water a lot, and all my friends were surfers and boating, and we never really looked at sharks as our friends. Okay?
Yeah.
They're the big bad guys. Dolphins, okay, dolphins are cool. Sea turtles, hey, they're cool, but sharks, we looked at those as the bad guys. But the Hawaiians don't. And I think, though, they have a very important point, because sharks, too, are extremely important for the health of the ocean because they feed upon things. In other words, nature is a perfect balance, with the exception when humans get involved and we start polluting and hunting things to extinction. But sharks are very important for feeding on things which can decimate other species, which can decimate the coral reef. So everything has its place. Sharks, though, unfortunately have the big bad reputation, and they are pretty scary creatures, but they are important.
Right. Okay, let's move on book-wise. And I'd just like you to mention Never Letting Go before we get into the Afterlife Frequency. In looking at the evolution of yourself as a writer, what brought you from the evidence of eternity to Never Letting Go? And then how does the Afterlife Frequency build on that body of work?
Thank you. That's a good question. Not many people ask me that. Never Letting Go was my first book. And the theme, if you will, of Never Letting Go is you have to learn to let go of the sorrow and the pain associated with the death, but never let go of the love for the person who died. And Never Letting Go, one of the reasons it's recommended by hospices and grief counselors worldwide is because it's a guide on the journey through grief. It will help you understand messages from spirits. It helps you understand spirits, in a way, come to our rescue. They will reach out to us. And Never Letting Go is a very helpful book when you're right after the death and you don't know what to do. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote about the 5 stages of grief, but there are 2 phases of grief. The first phase is shock, and that's we find out about the death. The shock can last a couple weeks up to a month where you're, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. I can't believe this happened. You can't eat, you can't sleep. You're just in complete turmoil. Eventually the shock will fade, but then trauma sets in. Trauma is no picnic at all. And that's what we have to live with for the rest of our lives. So Never Letting Go helps you in the shock and in the trauma phases to begin to help stabilize your emotions and understand that spirits do reach out to us. So Bob, when I was on the Never Letting Go speaking tour, people started asking questions. Is there reincarnation? Does God exist? Do animals have souls? Is there a hell? What about people who die by suicide? They began to ask all these really poignant questions. So what I started doing is I started writing down the questions, and the most prevalent ones became the outline for evidence of eternity, because I kept getting a lot of, is there scientific proof for this? Well, I'm a science guy. All right. As an attorney, I had to work with chemists, forensics, accident reconstructions, physicists, doctors, neuroscientists, because I specialized in head injury litigation. And so I wanted to explain to people how to bridge the gap between faith and science. And evidence of eternity was so well received. People kept asking me, particularly men, I want more science. So that led me to writing The Afterlife Frequency, which explains through quantum physics how all the various forms of spirit communication, whether it's mediumship, visitations where you feel a spirit around you or in a dream state, near-death experiences, deathbed visions when people who are dying start to see spirits around them, shared death experiences where people near the person dying start to see these as well, out-of-body experiences. So with the Afterlife Frequency, I explained the science of spirit communication, plus I introduced my RAFT technique, how to recognize, accept, feel without overthinking, and then trust messages from spirits. And I'm very humbled, very honored how well all of my books, particularly the Afterlife Frequency, has been received.
Okay, that's a good, thorough answer to that question. So what is, I guess, the connection between your profession as a lawyer and what appears to be also a profession as a psychic? When somebody says to you, "Who are you?" or when you just think, "Who am I?" How do you identify yourself?
I have had the dubious distinction of having two careers in my life that definitely evoke a reaction from everybody. Most people don't like lawyers. Look, my fellow attorneys will tell you that people don't like lawyers. Why? When do you go to a lawyer? You're getting sued, you're getting divorced, you've been arrested, you're have a contract. I mean, you go to lawyers because things are, most people don't wake up one morning and go, I feel great, everything's good, I think I'll go to a lawyer. I mean, maybe if you do, if you're, trying to put together a probate package or will, that type of thing. But people go to lawyers because they're in trouble or they have problems, and they don't always like the outcome, so therefore it's the lawyer's fault. I mean, I used to have a lot of criminal clients who spent the last 20 years of their life getting arrested, violating their probation, screwing everything up, and they expect me to fix it next Tuesday at 2 p.m. at their violation of probation hearing. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work that way. But the thing is, lawyers help people. Lawyers are like think of a lawyer as sort of a guide through a jungle. The legal profession's a jungle. There's all sorts of dangers, hidden things, booby traps along the way, and it would be my job to get you through this. Also, when people would say, well, how can you represent someone you know who is guilty? It is not my job to sit in judgment of people. What my job was as a criminal offense attorney is to make sure that the accused constitutional rights are protected. Okay. And that's our Constitution does, and I believe still does, and should mean something. It's what sets us apart from a military dictatorship or a religious theocracy like Iran or the Taliban, or some type of tyrannical dictatorship like Putin's Russia or Kim Jong-un's North Korea. We have a system, and for over 200 years, it's worked really well. Now, what do I do as a medium? Well, that definitely gets a reaction from people too. Either, oh, I don't believe that, or oh, mediums are not God, and you're doing the work of the devil, or some people are fascinated with it. But how does being a lawyer and a medium, how are they similar? Well, both jobs are about helping people. As a lawyer, I help people through the most difficult parts of their lives. As a psychic medium, I help people who are coping with the loss of a loved one by facilitating communication between them and their loved ones in spirit. Both jobs are about evidence. Clearly, a lawyer needs evidence to substantiate my case. But a medium has to produce verifiable facts and evidence transmitted by the spirits that can be verified by the recipient to guarantee the authenticity of the contact. And so that's where the two jobs do have some similarities. I also believe that my skill set as an attorney in research, in public speaking, and writing has certainly benefited my work as a spiritual teacher, a medium, a lecturer, and an author.
So right now, I guess and especially because I've been in contact with Rocky on and off for the past year, and you keep a pretty hectic calendar. when's the last time you were involved in a case with a client as an attorney?
Well, when I was on The Doctors, the CBS TV show The Doctors, and admittedly, that was back in 2016, but there's a reason I'm bringing that up. There was a cold case murder and of this young woman, Allison Feldman. She was murdered brutally in Phoenix, and the doctors, and it was really cool going to Paramount Studios. I mean, this is the same production company that did Dr. Phil. I'll never forget where, you know, we parked there and we get in the they sent out a golf cart with one of the Paramount employees, and we're driving through Paramount Studios. And I'm looking around going, Paramount, wow, they filmed Star Trek here. And I'm looking around going, and everything else. You know,
Yeah.
it was like, it was really cool. And I've been on TV quite a bit throughout my whole life, but, you know, being there was really, really an honor. And I did a reading for Allison's family, and a number of pieces of information came through about the DNA test, that the police were going about it wrong. They needed to expand the parameters of the test. Also, that the killer would already be in custody, but on different charges. And because of the DNA test, he'd be identified. Now, there was a lot more to this, but I want to keep it short. So long story short, I was on the show and you know, talked about all this. After that, Allison's family back in Phoenix got hold of the police and said, you know, you got to do something with the DNA test. Well, for the first time ever in the history of the state of Arizona, the police implemented the familial DNA test. And what the familial DNA test does, as Allison Spirit said, expand the parameters of the search. What it does is it searches for close relatives of the DNA sample. Bingo! Immediately they found what appeared to be a very close relative, like a brother, and this guy was in jail. Nice family. And they then found that the guy that the brother, his brother, in other words, the perpetrator, was incarcerated in another jail in Arizona for like his fourth drunk driving charge, and then they had a direct match. So by broadening the parameters of the DNA test, it led them to a close relative of the perpetrator and then to the perpetrator himself. Other things came out in the reading about how this would be challenged and yet it would prevail. And I checked upon this recently, and the defendant, who is awaiting trial on premeditated first-degree murder charges, his attorneys appealed this all the way up to the Arizona Supreme Court, and it has withstood all of the attacks. So at some point, this guy's going to go to trial. And this is one of the criticisms I have with our system of justice. This murder occurred in 2016. He was captured in 2017 after I did a reading. That was 8 years ago. And this family of Allison Feldman, the victim's family, is still waiting for justice. And I was always trained in law to believe that justice delayed is justice denied.
Right.
So all I can say is I have faith in our system of justice and in the prosecutors, and hopefully that Allison's family will receive the justice they so deserve.
Yeah. That's quite a story. Okay, so the Afterlife Frequency, then, what would the reader, or what would you hope the reader would glean from that particular book?
Well, the subtitle of the book is The Scientific Proof of Spiritual Contact and How That Awareness Will Change Your Life. And that's what it does. It explains that there is a sound scientific basis for the existence of the soul, the afterlife, spirit communication, that souls are coherent quantum fields, and we can communicate with them. I developed the electromagnetic soul theory. Every belief system, from Hinduism 5,000 years ago, the world's oldest religion, through Zoroastrianism, through Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Native American belief systems, the belief systems of the Pacific, all teach us that the soul, the who and what we are, pre-exists the body, comes into the body, moves on after the body dies. We know from the laws of thermodynamics and physics that energy is neither created nor destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. We know the brain, even though it's only 2% of the body's weight, uses over 20% of its electromagnetic energy. The brain has an electromagnetic field. So drawing upon all of this, plus a lifetime of spirit communication as a medium, I developed the electromagnetic soul theory, the EMS, which describes in 21st century terms, Bob, what we really are, which is pure consciousness that is eternal electromagnetic energy. So that when we die, that EMS, the electromagnetic soul, it's like a drop of water. It leaves our body and it plunges into the eternal sea of souls that I refer to, the collective consciousness. Our loved ones in spirit that are part of the collective consciousness remain energetically linked to us. And I explain in the Afterlife Frequency how when you think about them or you're grieving them, it can draw them to you, or how they will send signs to you. And the RAFT technique, recognize, accept, feel, and trust technique, will teach anyone how they can have these contact experiences and how wonderful they are. So that, in a nutshell, is just part of what you're going to get out of the Afterlife Frequency.
Okay, that's helpful, just because I thought if I already believe all these things, and I don't need scientific proof, so I don't need to read your book. But it goes beyond that. So I am interested in your book and wanting to read it, because it does go beyond that.
Exactly. And spoiler alert for all the listeners, don't expect a dry treatise. You're not going to be reading an algebra textbook. I try to write my books like juicy novels. Why? Because I suffered through so many boring books in the practice of law and in law school. I made a vow never to inflict that on anyone. I want you to be engaged. My manager, Rocky, you mentioned Rocky. She's awesome, and she helped set up this interview, or she did set up this interview. She came up with a great term. She calls what I do edutainment for the soul. Educate and entertain. Because, I've had to read these U.S. Supreme Court and appellate decisions and statutes and the Internal Revenue Code, and it's like, God, if I can't sleep, instead of taking an Ambien, just start reading a law case. You'll be out like a light. And the thing is, there's important information in there, but it could be presented in a less tedious manner. And that's what I wanted to do, or that's what I endeavored to do with all my books. Plus, I also write for Best Holistic Life magazine. And if you go to my website, afterlifefrequency.com, you can find out about how to subscribe to Best Holistic Life. And it's a wonderful magazine, and I write all types of articles, generally on spiritual topics, but sometimes on others. I'm currently working on an article about deciphering the language of prophecy, because in readings, Bob, my electromagnetic soul theory is substantiated in part by Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity. Einstein theorized that on the subatomic level, everything's made of molecules, which in turn are made of atoms, which in turn are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons, which in turn are made of the smallest particle of pure electromagnetic energy, which is a quantum. And that's where the term quantum physics comes from. Right. Now, that means everything. You and me, the microphones we're speaking into, the chairs we're sitting on, the light we're seeing, the radio waves that this show is broadcast on, the rings of Saturn and beyond, are all at the subatomic level, composed of the same form of electromagnetic energy. And people tell me, well, that's really hard to wrap my head around. Well, you think? It did take Albert Einstein to figure this out, okay? And not just Einstein, but Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Louis de Broglie, Mileva, Maravich. I mean, this is but this is not conjecture. We know this is true. This is a law of physics. Well, according to the theory of relativity, on the subatomic level, time as we know it doesn't exist. It's all occurring simultaneously, which is why spirits are capable of perceiving future events. Let me give an example. I was doing a reading for this woman, and her mother spirit came through, and the mother spirit began to describe to me a 7-year-old boy, little boy, looked like he was about 7, who's in our world, who is somehow connected to my client, and that he needed to go to the eye doctor because something was wrong with his eyes. He needed glasses. And my client said, well, I don't have any children, but I'm very close to my sister's son, who is 7 years old, and he's been complaining of headaches lately. Said, well, your mother said, get him to the doctor, to the eye doctor. And now your mother's playing me the song Tutti Frutti All Rudy by Little Richard. I hear Tutti Frutti All Rudy song. And she goes, well, that's interesting, but it doesn't make any sense at all. I know who Little Richard was, but that song has no relevance to me. Well, I've been doing this long enough, Bob, to know that no matter how weird it is, you just say it. 2 weeks later, I get an email, and she said, Mark, I talked to my sister, and she said, yeah, my son, he said things are blurry. He's having headaches. Let's take him to the eye doctor. So my client, her sister, and the 7-year-old boy go to the eye doctor. And as soon as they walked into the doctor's office, on the radio, it started playing Tutti Frutti All Rudy by Little Richard. Now, I ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what are the odds of that happening? I think we're way past 1 billion to 1.
Yeah.
The electromagnetic soul theory explains this. Her mother spirit, pure EM energy, electromagnetic energy, on the quantum level, is able to perceive what we call the future. An electromagnetic soul also can scan somebody's body. This is her grandson. She scanned him and realized, hey, there's a problem with his eyes. He needs to go. And all the boy needed was glasses. So it was good, though. So they're able to detect energetic anomalies within our body. So the boy needed to go get glasses. Then, to let everybody know that they had properly received and interpreted the message, radio waves are also a form of electromagnetic energy. So the EMS, the electromagnetic soul, was able to discern the precise song that would be playing the exact moment they walked into the doctor's office. And that is, in a nutshell, how spirits are capable of seeing future events.
Great explanation. I hate to say this, but we're out of time. And at the end of each interview, I always ask the guest to lead the audience with a few words of wisdom. So this is your opportunity. Whatever you'd like to say to this audience in terms of what you want them to know, now's your chance.
It was about 3 weeks after my mother died, and I was very upset. And I was driving back from court, and I pulled over, and all of a sudden there was a flash of light in my car, and I looked to the passenger side seat, and for a second, Bob, I saw her outline in pure silver white light, and her voice filled my head and said, Mark, your life's mission is to help people understand that God exists, that heaven, the afterlife, nirvana, the other side, whatever you want to call it, exists. that souls are immortal living beings, that humans can communicate with souls, and that we will all be reunited when it is your time to leave the material world in the light you call God.
So you're a man on a mission.
So I thank God every day. I'm very humbled by what I'm able to do. I look at myself as the custodian of this ability, and I'm here to help people. If you want my services and may benefit from those, please visit my website, afterlifefrequency.com. Also, every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, I co-host a live stream show called The Psychic in the Dock. My co-host, Dr. Pat Basili, is a world-renowned behavioral psychologist. I take calls from listeners. I'll do mini readings. Dr. Pat helps you understand what they mean. We look at the show as our ministry. And so I invite everyone to call in. You can find out about that by visiting my website. And Bob, I especially want to thank you for the honor of having me on your podcast. It's just great meeting you. And I look forward to seeing you again. I'll be back at the Edgar Cayce A.R.E. for the Mediumship Summit this November.
Oh, great. That's good to know. And audience, you know that I will have links to all these connections that Mark just mentioned on my website under the resources section. So just check out your spiritualjourneypodcast.com and you'll find that information there. So audience, as always, take what resonates with you, incorporate it into your life, put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.